Hello. I think one of the most striking reading experiences that I have ever had is with the novel Brooklyn, because the emotional power of this story crept up on me so slowly. The plot itself is quite slow to develop as we follow a young Irish woman named Eilish Lacey as she's compelled to move to America in the 1950s in order to find work. And in doing so, she leaves behind her small Irish community and the life she might have had in Ireland. And as I was reading it, I felt, well, this is enjoyable. It's really beautifully written, but I don't understand the point of it. Like, why did this novel need to be written? But then at a certain part of the story, the overwhelming heft of its meaning hit me, and I was suddenly completely engrossed in this tale and in Eilish's dilemma that she was facing and how she was delaying making a decision and how this made it even more tense. And so I ended up absolutely loving reading Brooklyn, and I was so excited recently when I saw that Colm Tóibín had published a direct sequel to that novel with this new book called Long Island. And I know a lot of readers are wondering and asking, do you need to have read Brooklyn before reading this new book? And I think Tóibín is quite clever in how he keys the reader into the drama of the previous novel and its characters. I don't think you need to have read Brooklyn or watched the film before reading this new novel. But I would also say that there is a special pleasure in already knowing so many of these characters going into reading Long Island, and it is definitely worth reading Brooklyn beforehand because going into this, I was already locked into the story. And this novel, unlike Brooklyn, it immediately sweeps you up in the drama of the story, because at the very beginning of the book, we meet Eilish again, this time in the 1970s. It's 20 years after the events of Brooklyn, and we follow her as she is seemingly contentedly married to an Italian-American man named Tony. They have two children who are almost adults, but then at the very beginning of this book, a stranger knocks on Eilish's door and informs her that his wife is pregnant with her husband Tony's child. And what's more, he is not going to accept this child. Once this child is born, this stranger is going to bring this child to Eilish and Tony's doorstep and leave the baby there for them to deal with. So yes, this is an absolutely gripping dilemma that poor Eilish is immediately thrown into. Now, this news and this dilemma very naturally makes Eilish question her marriage and the choices that she's made in the past, but it also brings into sharp focus her position in her life and in her family life, in her community. So she lives in this house on Long Island, right next to Tony's Italian-American family, who are very opinionated and controlling. A lot of them are really lovely and charismatic, but yeah, they also have very strong opinions. And once they learn about this dilemma as well, they make a decision on what should happen going forward. And Eilish is like, no, I am not gonna have anything to do with this baby. But she's made to feel like, well, it's your responsibility as his wife to deal with this situation, even though Tony is the one that has betrayed her and done and gotten them into this incredibly sticky situation. But very conveniently, in a way, Eilish's mother is turning 80 soon, and this gives her an excuse really to go back to Ireland, back to her home community, and there try to figure out what is she going to do about this situation and how is she going to move forward. And when she embarks on this journey, the narrative point of view shifts to not only follow Ailish, but also two other people. So there is Nancy, who is Ailish's longtime friend that she's known since childhood, and Nancy has continued living in their community. She lost her husband at a fairly early age, and so she's had the responsibility of raising their children, and she now runs a chip shop, which the odors and the noise caused by the patrons of this really disrupt their local community, but she's very strong-willed in keeping this business together. And we also follow the point of view of Jim, who is Ailish's old flame, who has stayed single and who's now running his family pub. And he has developed a relationship with Nancy, and they have become engaged, but it's a very tricky relationship to negotiate, since Nancy's daughter is getting married, and so Nancy doesn't want to overshadow that news, and so it's just a very carefully balanced situation, and into that re-enters Ailish into their lives, and then we follow the drama going forward in this story, which is so compelling and so surprising. All of the tension and the power of this story isn't just in that initial crisis of suddenly Ailish is going to have a new baby in her home that isn't hers. There is a lot more going on in this story as we follow the events in this community. And one of the absolutely brilliant things about Tóibín's writing is his ability to create very complex characters that are so nuanced and interesting to read about. Not just the three central characters of this novel, but a lot of the minor characters as well are so memorable. And so there is Francesca, Ailish's mother-in-law, who is very kind and strong-willed and really keeping the family together, but also is very willful and imposing her will. And so when Ailish challenges that, it is so compelling to read about. And there's Ailish's own mother, who is also very opinionated and crotchety, and so when Ailish comes back, she tries to improve her mother's life by buying these appliances that she can keep in her home, but her mother refuses them, and that's very funny. But also I feel like there's no real heroes or villains in this novel, because even Tony himself, who commits this egregious moral crime and cheating on his wife and impregnating another man's wife, and then that is brought to his doorstep. I feel like even him, Tóibín shows his emotional fragility alongside his emotional immaturity. I mean, of course, I'm much more sympathetic to Ailish herself, but I feel like, he really gets the complexity of Tony's characters. And then there's a whole number of minor characters as well, like Tony's brother Frank, who is a very successful lawyer, and but there's a small comment about him that he's never going to have a girlfriend or get married because he's one of those men. And this is just a passing comment that is made. And then Tony, when he hears this news, he's like, don't repeat this to anyone. And so I feel like there could be a whole spin-off novel about Frank as well. But then there are a number of other characters of like a woman named Mags, who's an Irish woman that is selling a piece of property, but she is holding on to this property and putting up the price in order to get a lot of gossip, and just the way that she tries to draw gossip out of the person who is trying to buy the property is so compelling, reading that scene and that dialogue going backwards and forwards. And I feel like this brings out a lot of the humor in the story in through the dialogue and the interactions and the contradictions in these characters. Of you have a lot of local Irish people that will say like, oh, I'm not one to gossip, but then really they want to know all of the juicy details about their local community, and you know that they are passing it along as well. And there is also another minor character that is briefly mentioned in here, of Nora Webster, and of course there is a whole other novel that is called Nora Webster, that is dedicated to her, of this local woman in the community, and who, it's not really so much a prequel to this book, but it's more like a companion novel, I think, because, you know, we do get mention of Ailish and her family in the book Nora Webster, but really it's all about this woman, and she provides a really interesting counterpoint to Ailish herself, because Nora Webster is a woman that has lived in the community her entire life and been married, had a family, but then she lost her husband, and the novel of Nora Webster is following her in her grief and trying to adjust to, because her whole life she has only been a wife and a mother, and now she has an opportunity to be someone completely different and pursue her interests in a way that she's never been able to before, and who finds the aloneness of solitude, of not having a partner anymore, really difficult to deal with. And it's so interesting how that compares with Ailish, who, there's a really striking moment in this book where Ailish is staying somewhere by herself and suddenly feels this sense of liberation, that this is really the first time in her life that she has been really on her own and feeling like she can steer her own destiny in this way, and who finds in this a lot of possibility and hope that she hasn't had before. It's so clever in all of the interactions and this very strong dialogue, that it's not just what these characters are saying, but it's about what is left unsaid. There's an unbearably moving scene where we follow a married couple who are in bed together in night. It is completely dark, and they're both awake, and they have a lot to say to each other, but they remain silent. And it's these things that remain unsaid that creates so much drama and tension. And the way that this author can create scenes like that is so powerful. And then there's another scene where a character says to another, can you say that you love me? Can you confirm that? And the other character responds, yes, I can. But then you realize, well, that's not the same as actually saying the words, I love you. And because those words aren't actually said, you know that the plans that these characters are making might not play out in the way that we're expecting them to, or maybe hoping that they will. And that is such a compelling thing about the story and these characters as well, that we can see all of these potential futures that they are imagining for themselves, and the plans that they are making, and they're following their hopes, and how those different streams in the story, those elements of the plot, come together to create this whole new dilemma, which is both similar to Brooklyn. So I feel like a lot of the things in this sequel kind of mimic the things in the first book and deliver a lot of the same pleasures, but it's in a very different context and time period and area of these characters' lives, because they're older. These main characters are now in their 40s, and so they've had a lot more life experience. So following the central question of this story of what is Ailish going to do now, is So compelling, and part of that I feel like is the way that the author really shows her position so strongly. There's so many details about her life, which she brings into it, and her point of view and position as someone who has lived in America for a long time and now returned to her native country, where everyone feels very familiar with her and feels like they know her, but they also don't know her because she has grown a lot and had so many experiences in America, which they are unaware of, that her family and members of the community are kind of unaware of. And I thought it was so striking how there were some parts of this where Ailish is wondering, like, why hasn't anybody really asked about my life in America, and what I've experienced in that time. There's this kind of wanting to know about her life, but also not wanting to directly engage with her. And that's a real like complexity of human relationship that I feel like he gets so well in this novel of people wanting to know each other, but also not wanting to directly engage with them, and which feels like a contradiction, but I think is so much a part of human nature and the way that we interact with each other. And Ailish does find new opportunities for herself there, some which she had been thinking about and possibly planning on, and some which she hadn't thought of before, of that her brother offers to buy her a house in Ireland, so she might have this entire other life in Ireland and might just leave her husband behind. But then she has her children who are almost adults and feels an obligation to them, but also still cares about her husband and the life that she is made for herself in America and that she's left behind. So it's a really difficult situation that she's in, and the way that her story plays out, and the stories of Jim and Nancy, it's so interesting. I'm not going to give any spoilers of what happens in this book, but I found the ending of it so compelling, and I was left wanting even more of this story because I enjoyed it and loved it so much. But at the same time, I feel like the ending is kind of perfect of where it stops. In a way, I feel like this seems like quite a simple and straightforward story, although one that does have a very compelling plot to it. But at the same time, I feel like there's so much complexity to this and so much that Tóibín layers into the story over time. And so we get so many small details of this time period of the 1970s. There's mentions of Nixon in America in the background, and larger political events that are occurring, which are sort of touching upon this small Irish community that we follow through most of the novel. But most of the time, it's really all about what's happening in this locality. And there's things about the story that bring this era and time period to life, of like a telephone box that where someone is trying to make a call because they don't want to be overheard by other people, but then there's a coin stuck in this telephone box, so it can't be used. And so you're suddenly aware of the limitations in this era, and just in communication of people being able to speak to one another, and the technological limitations, and but also the decisions that people are facing on both a local and a larger nationwide and worldwide level. There's also a very funny detail where the notion of getting rid of old underwear and getting new underwear is kind of dismissed as an American fad. And there are so many small elements like that in this story to savor and enjoy, but also the overall meaning of this story about how communities and families support one another and create this necessary network, but at the same time they can hinder individuals and prevent them from growing and achieving all of their opportunities and potential in life. All of that and more, I think, makes this an absolutely brilliant novel, and one that I would highly recommend, whether you have read Brooklyn or not. And you could say that this is very familiar territory for this author, that he's written about these sorts of characters and communities before and Irish life before, but he does it so well. So why not have more of it? And I hope we continue to have more books like this by Tóibín. But it shows what a masterful writer he is, because he's written about so many different subjects, from ancient Greece to more contemporary times, to writing a brilliant fictionalization of the life of Henry James in The Master, which I think is my favorite book by him. But these novels, this trio of novels of Brooklyn and the companion book Nora Webster and this new novel Long Island also have a special place in my heart now. So I would love to hear if you have read this book, if you have read all of the books, or if you're interested in reading them now. Please let me know what you think about them, or just this book, in the comments below, because I'm so excited to discuss this with more people, because it's such a great reading experience, and I'd highly recommend it. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye bye.